This is just a good, solid OTA. First up, Debris is becoming a totally different card. She is going from a 3/3 to a 3/7, but instead of adding rocks to both your and your opponent's side of the board, she's just adding rocks for you now, which is a really interesting archetype of card. First things first, making Clog a little bit worse is probably just a good thing for the enjoyability of Marvel Snap. Clog is a deck that not only prevents people from doing what they want to do, but also prevents people from going to Showdown, turn 6 where the cubes double, and generally makes Marvel Snap, in my opinion, a bit of a less fun game to play when it's strong. Debris is a very free-rollable Clog. Debris plus a Viper really sort of accentuates what she's doing already, so getting her out of the Clog deck is interesting. Getting her into a sort of big body with a downside format is also interesting. I think that this would have been the kind of card that could have really seen some success early in Marvel Snap's life cycle, when people could realistically play Patriot decks, and Patriot wasn't just drastically underpowered compared to its, if you'll pardon the reference here, compatriot Cerebro, a fellow 3-cost card that has some deck building restrictions, but Cerebro just simply has a higher number on it than what Patriot has. Patriot is where this card sort of wants to be, but I'm not really sure that ends up actually bearing fruit. So what else can we do with what Debris gives us? Well, we could still try to Viper it, but I think the direction I would want to go with this is play this as a 3/7 in my Merlin deck. Merlin has great ways of utilizing extra bodies on the board. This is the kind of thing that can be very good for that case. And then in other cases, you could simply just play it late as a 3/7 that has good rate and not actually pay the cost that is required of it. This card only really has a cost if you are actually going to use those board spots. So if you play it as the last card, there is not really an associated downside. It just gets to be a 3/7. So when you're curving it out, you want a way to mitigate it. Merlin, I think, is probably where this goes. Or you want to be a Patriot deck, which I think is probably a little bit underpowered. But generally speaking, you could also just play this card alongside a Shadow King. This is a great pair for a Shadow King right now. This as a 3/7 in one lane, Shadow King to get rid of whatever's happening in the other lane. A lot of decks are just kind of okay with that. That's a good thing to be building for right now. I think this card has some legitimate potential in a way that maybe Rhino doesn't. And I think this card sort of compares interestingly to Rhino in that Rhino is probably worse for you. The downside of taking up 2 spots at a location is actually a little bit more prominent than the downside of taking up 3 spots, but diffused across 3 locations. I think that's an interesting thing that came up when I was trying to evaluate this card. I'm not sure it'll sort of take the place of Gladiator, but I do think that when I look at this card, what I see is a Gladiator that instead of working with Fenris Wolf stuff, works with Merlin stuff. And frankly, I would rather be a Gladiator that works with Merlin stuff than a Gladiator that works with Destroy stuff. Merlin stuff is just better right now. Misery getting a long overdue nerf to 4/8. Frankly, this feels to me like one of those cases where it's like, I don't really know why you're doing this now. I've obviously been saying Misery should have been a 4/8 for the entire time it's been a 4/9. There was no point in buffing it in the first place, but it's far from the biggest problems that seems like they could be addressing at this point. This is a change that I feel like is almost a month late. It's been a while since I've been like, wow, Misery's a real problem here. Whenever it comes up, it's just like, yeah, they should do this. And I don't want to act like, oh, well, now they're doing the thing that I wanted them to do. It's just, it sort of feels not necessarily out of touch, but like, this is hardly the problem in any metagame that we're having right now. Misery 4/8/4/9, kind of going to be the same card. It had a free point of power. It was pointless for it to have a free point of power, but at the same time, it feels almost pointless to address that free point of power when it's so far down the list of things that are reasonably problematic. Now, I've been fairly critical on this channel of high-level players sort of looking at this and saying, well, here's what has to happen because this is what happens at top 50. Like Move, for example, pretty limited to that space currently. But I do think that Misery is a case in which I'm doing that, where it's like this card went to 4-9, presumably because the entire rest of the player base, and I don't mean this as a slight on the rest of the player base, it's just that like this card doesn't get interpreted the correct way when you don't know stuff like this. The correct way to interpret Misery has basically always been, this is a hood bot. It works with the hood. That's the card you put it in the deck for. And like, yeah, there's other stuff you could do with it, but if you didn't have hood in your deck, you weren't playing this. And so this is always just that. And my theory for Misery for the longest time has been, I don't think that kind of knowledge permeated to Johnny Toilet Gamer. So Johnny Toilet Gamer is out here like, you know, oh, I've got a Kate Bishop in here. Let's get some extra. Like, no, you don't want to do any of that, right? Like, you don't do any of that. You do the hood stuff. And then in V-hand decks, sometimes you do a Frigga copy so you get an extra V-hand. That's pretty much the extent of it. Occasionally, an Iron Patriot, very rare to do anything other than that. I would say probably 70% of this card's power is an understanding that it is a hood bot, and also that you don't have to play it on something if you don't want to. You can just play it as a 4-9, and that's sort of like where the card isn't telling you how it's supposed to be used is a big part of why I think this card underperformed enough that they felt comfortable buffing it. It just seems weird when all of High Elo is talking about how messed up Move is to be like, well, you know, High Elo was right about Misery and then just not touch Move. I've talked about the point at which I'd be worried about tech stuff being too weak. And I don't think we're there yet, but this is another step in that direction in a way I don't particularly love. Cosmic Ghost Rider losing a point of power, I think it's a perfectly justifiable thing to do, especially in a world where maybe in a little bit we'll be getting a card that is a 1 energy kind of semi-cosmic Ghost Rider in the form of Deafening Chord. I think it's possible that this makes sense. I wouldn't have pulled the trigger on this as readily as they seemed to. Now, I realize that the metagame has been sort of moving towards this kind of like, all right, well, let's do some generically applicable tech, and maybe it makes sense that you should be taxing that at a higher rate. But I think Cosmic Ghost Rider, frankly, needed some time to shine. And the cynic in me is kind of wondering why they did this in advance of releasing a $100 bundle with Cosmic Ghost Rider in it. What I find really fascinating about their push to make tech a little bit worse is it's very clearly not in sync with the product side of the game. For example, they nerfed Misery right before the $100 Creative House Pocket bundle that had her in it comes out. They are nerfing Cosmic Ghost Rider right before the $100 bundle with an awesome Cosmic Ghost Rider in it comes out. It demonstrates a genuine willingness to say this is the design vision we like, this is the game we like, and we are willing to sacrifice short-term profits in order to get there. I guess I'm just surprised to see it. Long overdue Vision to 5.9. I feel like this has been a change that has just been sitting there in whatever design file they have, and they're just like, well, we can pull the trigger on this whenever. Frankly, I wish they'd pulled the trigger on this during Viv Vision season because the Vision variant on the season pass was so damn good, but better late than never. This is just a classic case of it is free to do this change. They have buffed many of Vision's compatriots in Series 1. Both Claw and White Tiger have seen buffs since the game released. Vision has been a 5/8 the entire time. That is sort of obviously negative. And I think that as time has gone on, they have become less like, here's the thing about Vision is the original issue with Vision is you don't want the game to be about lying about where your power is going to be, power redistribution late in the game. You don't want the game to be about that. But the more combo-y things get, the more it just matters less and less where that 9 power actually is, and that providing that kind of ability to a mid-rangey deck is probably just becomes a good thing overall, because what's happening is like, okay, you know, you can lie about where your vision's going to be, and that's not great, but my destroy opponent is playing a 32 power Deadpool and a 60 power Null. So who's really doing the lying about where their power is going to be, right? Like, I think that problems with cards that sort of lie about their power distribution are much more limited to metagames where mid-range is a popular and powerful strategy. And right now, the mid-rangiest deck seems to be like ongoing or like the zombie deck. And frankly, those decks have 5 drops that are twice as powerful as 9 power. So I'm not sure why I'd care. So in other words, not only is this long overdue, in my opinion, just on the base power rate of Vision. It's also a metagame that is perfectly set up for this to not even matter at all. This is the kind of thing that is exactly what they should be doing to early series cards, is make them stronger in ways that are on the table. It is free. It is right there. And that's what this is. A Cosmic Ghost Rider buff to 2/7 is just a very normal thing to happen. No issues with this whatsoever. Seems pretty free. Again, underperforming card. Feel free to add power to it. Cosmic Ghost Rider's issue is much more an issue of the decks that can reasonably play it, and then it is an issue of its own power. I still do wonder if it would be too out of line for them to do Cosmic Ghost Rider that actually works with the goblins. I realize that when I look at that, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's super out of line. You get -8 power on the Hobgoblin. It'd be really cool. Then you bring back the Hobgoblin. It's super messed up. I don't actually think that's that messed up anymore. I think that's just like a pretty cool thing to do. I don't know. Maybe it's a little too much. There are certainly people who believe in the power of this card, but frankly, I feel like you could probably just stack more numbers onto this guy and have him be an even more interesting card. One of the things I've talked about recently on my podcast, shout out to the KMBest Podcast with Jerry Thompson, you can check out a link in the description, is the lack of just big bodies with downsides. And we see Debris getting turned into one of those during a patch like this. We see this guy getting stronger. I would like there to be more of these, and I would like there to be more power in them. And so while this is a step in the right direction, I don't know if it's enough of a step in the right direction for this card to make me excited. And frankly, Cosmic Ghost Rider's positioning has gone from a card that typically the way it would work is like you do your Cosmic Ghost Rider thing with your gore and then all that, right? Like you do all that, but that kind of deck was pretty highly specialized at beating mid-rangey decks, and the point ceiling of the game is it's just a lot higher now. So I think they have a lot more room to be aggressive with this kind of guy, because he's never going to be full combo. Hela is the full combo. He'll just be like half of that. It'll be this guy in normal Ghost Rider, and it'll be pretty good. It'll beat mid-range decks, but it's not going to like instantly win every matchup anymore. And I think that that is really interesting in terms of the positioning of like this kind of stuff, Black Knight stuff. That stuff has always been halfway between mid-range and combo with the goal of being bigger than the mid-range decks. But in a world where people are actually just doing a bunch of combo stuff, what it ends up being is smaller than the combo decks. I think they could be more aggressive here. Shout out to Butt. We finally got the M'Baku buff in here. I won't necessarily claim credit for the fact that this buff happened, and Butt advocated for it on my channel during 8 Cubes, which I know for a fact at least one person who works at Second Dinner has watched in the past. I'm not saying that's where the idea came from. I am just heavily implying it, hanging a congratulations to me banner, and generally going to go around everywhere saying that this happened because of me and the platform that I provided to Butt. Funny sentences aside, I also think this does basically nothing. It's a free point of power to M'Baku. You get exactly one person very, very happy, but those decks aren't bad because of M'Baku. This is actually a fairly well, I mean, they are, but you know what I mean. This is actually a fairly notable thing that has come up a lot when I've talked to Butt, who's like this very off-meta gamer. It's a lot harder to be off-meta against decks with super high point ceilings. That's sort of what the meta has become. You can do weird stuff against a mid-range deck, because really what you're building for against a mid-range deck is to have more points than them and dodge the common interaction. That's the idea. It's a lot easier to do that when you can look at a deck, be like, all right, they're playing Shang-Chi, they're playing Mobius, they're playing Mercury, I can make a deck that dodges all of those, right? It's a lot harder to do that when your opponent is playing a 60 power Deadpool, right? Like, it's just a lot harder to be like, oh, well, I've done the off-meta thing. And so I think that that is a notable trend here where it's like, all right, we buffed M'Baku. What more do you guys want? I mean, it's the metagame. It's not about M'Baku at this point. Like, the reason you aren't seeing, like, Blink M'Baku Zoo is not related to the relative power of M'Baku. It's related to everything else going on here. So, you know, this is a free edition. I think it's pretty cool. In a world where 3 power ever mattered in a game, we could talk about this. We're just not in that world at all. I think it is really funny to like do this to Fan Fei, because I do think that it's pretty clear she was an underperformer. She did not make the cut in approximately any good version of the move deck, but to do this to her is super funny because I like, there's just gonna be a bunch of people who are like, why would you nerf Fanfei? It's like, I'm fairly certain this was intended as a buff, right? The power really mostly matters on your other guys, right? Like this extra power on your Human Torch, you're usually pretty happy to get things like that. That's typically a way to buff a card, not to nerf it. I think that this also is just like, I don't know why you'd buff Fanfei either, because the move deck is already so good and so full of really strong things. So it's like, all right, what do we want to do to buff Fanfei? Make her 3 cost. Okay, well, we definitely don't want to do that. So instead of doing that, we'll do this, right? Like that's sort of the thought process that I'm reading into here, where it's like, I don't think this is enough of a buff to make Fanfei relevant. I do think it's a buff. I don't think it's a meaningful one. So it just sort of sits there like the person who did this video, NotMyDance did the graphics for this video. I'm very grateful to him. I'll check him out, please do. But like the yellow that he uses for all of the sort of reworks or side grades or whatever, right? Like that was for Debris. I feel like for Debris, I can look at that and be like, you know what? Not a rework or a side grade. I'm more interested in this card. For Fanfei, I look at this yellow and I'm like, yep, like this is a yellow change. This is just, it's a yellow change. There is not much difference happening here. That's what happened. Hydra Stomper is getting a point of power. A lot of the high elo players are complaining about move being too good, and it probably is. But I don't think that's related to Hydra Stomper, who's not really a move card. Like, I know that sounds a little weird. Hydra Stomper, not a move card. Move, Human Torch, Dagger, that kind of stuff. Hydra Stomper, not really in that vein. Hydra Stomper is a Silk card. Hydra Stomper has move elements in it. The decks overlap on things like Craven and Helene sometimes, but it's a Silk card. It's honestly closer to a Scream card than it is to like a move card. So I don't really see this as like that big of a deal, where it's like the deck that this goes in is not the deck that's actually getting buffed here. It just isn't. And I do think that it is kind of funny. Like you see the Golden Gauntlet people talking about it like, they definitely nerf and buff based on Golden Gauntlet. And I think they're much more liable to buff based on Golden Gauntlet. But I also think what's really happening there is when they do balance that involves Golden Gauntlet, I think they're not doing it because of Golden Gauntlet. It lines up with stuff that already looks wrong in their data, right? Like when they buffed all those cards that sucked after the first Golden Gauntlet, is that because they were not played in Golden Gauntlet, or is that because they sucked? Like, is that just because they were bad in their data and didn't get played in Golden Gauntlet? This one's really funny because like it just won Golden Gauntlet and they looked at that and they were like, this is crap. This is just bad. I don't think it needed the point, but I do think that I'm happier with the card as a 3/3, and I don't think it's a meaningful change to what it is. Like, this is just I like raising the floor of cards like this because I think that opens up the space in which you can use these cards. So just from like a conceptual design standpoint, I think this is a really good change. From an even more like baseline conceptual standpoint, I just think a card is a lot more appealing if it doesn't say like a smaller number on its power than it does on its cost, unless that number is like 0 or -1, which we all understand actually means like 10 million power, right? Like when you look at Gore, if they make a 6 -1, you know that means that the effect is super bonkers. But if they make like a 3/3, you're like, I don't know if that means the effect is really good or they just whiffed on this, right? Like Viv Vision or something like that. In my perfect world, all 3/3s would be 3/4s, but just to even get to that baseline, all 3/2s got to be 3/3s, right? Like I just think that this card looks better when it says this. And I realize that's like maybe a stupid thing to consider, but like they're trying to sell us these cards. And I think it's just way easier for me to look at this card and be like, I like it, floor is higher, baseline. I don't think this is the world's most impactful change. I think any deck that was good with this card was already going to be good with this card. But this card getting better is awesome because it's a really cool and unique archetype, which is part of what I wanted to talk about with the move stuff. Like people complain about this, like, oh, they're making moves stronger. They're making moves stronger. Dude, like this deck, the Silk deck, is one of the biggest most impossible side hits of everyone playing Mercury to beat the move deck, because it doesn't have nearly the point output to beat that deck. It doesn't have anywhere close, but it also gets hosed by the people playing Mercury. And so it's just like, yeah, I actually do feel like this deck kind of did need the help. I like, maybe I'm off base about it, but I feel like by the time Golden Gauntlet happened, it was good in exactly that situation. A week later, I would have said this deck was actively bad again because of the way the metagame shifted. It takes a lightning strike level of probability for Hydra Stomper to be an elite deck. I don't mind it getting buffed. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one. Have a wonderful evening.